to our September board meeting for Portland Parks and Recreation. And I want to start off this morning. We have been recording our meetings, as is now the custom for public meetings in accordance with Oregon law. So I just wanted to make everyone aware that this is being recorded and will be posted. The other piece that's a new announcement is just that we need to comply with our conflict of interest designations. Some of us had submitted forms earlier and those did not transfer over. So I am included in one of those folks who needs to resubmit a form. So those of you like me who have not submitted a form recently need to do that. And then we'll be good in terms of our compliance with conflict of interest. So welcome everyone. We're gonna start out today by hopefully everyone had a chance to get out and go backpacking or gardening or mountain biking or windsurfing over the weekend. And so I'm curious what everyone did in terms of recreation, as we are here as the Portland Parks and Recreation Board. So we were not very ambitious. I did get out for a bicycle ride on Saturday with a friend and swung by Eastmoreland Golf Course and saw that it was very well used. And then our big project was a garden project where we cleaned a deck. So not terribly exciting, but a satisfying Labor Day weekend. I will randomly pick Adina to next tell us how her Labor Day weekend went.
Well, you surprised me there, Paul. So I was on furlough on Friday. So I had a 4-day weekend, which was lovely. And both Friday and Saturday were spent doing outdoor stuff. On Friday, I went paddle boarding at Battleground Lake, and that was awesome. And I stood up for the second time ever, so that was great. And on Saturday, I went hiking in Mount Hood, nice long hike, and did a lot of rock scrambling, but that was because there was a lack of safe crossing. So it was fun. And then Sunday and Monday were just relaxing times at home. It was my husband's birthday yesterday, so we did whatever he wanted.
Fun.
Do you need me to tag someone, or are you gonna take the?
Go ahead, you tag someone.
Patty.
Hello. Well, I only traveled virtually this weekend. As you see, I'm still hanging out in Ireland. Nice breeze coming in off the bay. But that's as far as I managed to get. Randy, your tab.
Oh, God. Let's see. Well, I went for a long hike in Indian Heaven Wilderness near Mount Adams, and then a long bike ride in Gifford Pinchot on Sunday, and then yesterday got back here because I was totally spooked by all the smoke coming up the valley and was afraid I would get blocked. So I came back for the events, the incredible events of last night of wind and smoke and everything. So nice start to the weekend, apocalyptic end. And I'll tag Lorena.
Hi, good morning, everybody. So during the weekend, I stay home, but during the week, I went camping at Richardson Lake, close to Eugene area, Junction City. Yeah, that was fun. I'll tag Alejandra.
Good morning, everyone. This weekend, I was out celebrating my 4-year wedding anniversary with my partner, and we hiked out to Hardy Falls and Pool of the Winds in the Gorge area. Also got a little spooked by the smoke that we saw overhead, but it was a really lovely weekend. And I'm not quite certain who's gone yet, but I will tag Alejandro.
Good morning, everyone. Missed the question, but assuming it's what did we do this weekend? I stayed at home for most of it. I did went on a quick hike on Metro's Burlington Creek Natural Area, the North Wellington Hills, and then I visit a number of different smaller parks in Northeast Portland where I can have my little kid run around and kick ball and chase squirrels. Not sure who hasn't gone yet. Maybe Mike?
Sure. So, well, last weekend, the weekend before last, we had gone came down on the Metolius. So this past weekend, we decided to just stay in and nest and did some decluttering and cleansing and played some board games. And that was about the highlight of the weekend. So I'll go ahead and tag Jenny.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I mostly was around the house. We're working on a big project in the back. We're building a new deck and trying to get it some kind of outdoor hangout space ready for COVID winter. So we feel a little crunched to do that. But I also went for a really nice hike yesterday, my favorite in-town hike in Forest Park from Laura McClay up to Pittock Mansion. And that was lovely. So I will pick Tamara.
Hey everyone. Yeah, other than the apocalyptic evening, and it's still really windy at my house right now, I don't know about everyone else. I just went to Hag Lake over in Hillsborough, which was nice, and took my dog and my husband and we splashed around, and it was a like perfect weather day on Saturday, so that was great. And I will pass it to Bonnie.
Good morning. Thank you, Tamara. I didn't really get out anywhere, but I did take my daily walk to Grant Park, where I witnessed the tree that had fallen down and landed into the pool. Let me see if I can pull a picture to share with you all. So can you see it? I'm in there for scale. Whoops, I'm getting messages. Can you see it? Anyhow, so not exactly recreation in the normal sense, but my daily walk in the park was not unexciting yesterday. Let's put it that way. Let's see. I will tag Pune.
Good morning, everybody. I am in the middle of studying for the LSAT, so I was home all weekend studying for the test. I'm hoping to take the test in November. So that was my weekend. And I will choose, I don't know who's gone. Lauren, have you gone? Sorry, I don't know.
No.
Okay, perfect.
So my son turned 40 this weekend at a virtual birthday party online. So it's pretty fun.
How about Todd?
Morning, everybody. I did some fishing on the Deschutes River and played some golf during the windstorm yesterday at Eastmoreland Golf Course.
Exciting.
When the wind was at your back, the ball went really far.
Yep.
Okay. Who are we missing?
Well, we haven't heard from Brooke yet.
Oh, there we go. Brooke.
Hi, folks. I actually had a really nice weekend. I went to the coast on Saturday, you know, against the rules of leaving the area, but it was beautiful and warm, and I think on Sunday I went up to Mount Tabor, which is something I like to do from time to time, and just enjoy the sunset and the beautiful view of the city over the reservoir. And yeah, it's pretty low key. Yesterday I did some camping planning that I'm going to be doing in a couple weeks, so that's exciting. exciting to look forward to.
Thanks, Brooke. And then Everett.
I had family in town, so we did a outdoor socially distanced get together on Saturday, which was very nice. I have a couple of hopefully brief announcements. One, I have to depart this meeting early today for a conflict, so I'll be leaving at 9:30. And this, of course, is my last meeting with this group because Dan Ryan gets sworn in tomorrow. So it's been a pleasure working with all of you, and thank you for all of your insights and passion for our park system. We greatly appreciate and rely on your energy and your commitment to our parks to help shape the future of the Bureau, and you've done that in spades. So thank you, and it's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Everett. Good luck. Let's see. Kenya.
Good morning, everyone. I was out in the smoke yesterday, actually smoking meats. So it went from, as you know, it went from this pleasant day to, yeah, it was just dark in, like 15, 20 minutes. So for the most part, I was just cooked outside this weekend and, just watched my daughter play in the yard, did some home improvement projects.
Great. And let's see, Tim.
Good morning, everybody. I was excited, and the dog was very excited to get back out to Thousand Acre Dog Park this weekend. And so I'm not sure when it reopened, but he was pumped to be able to get out there and see a bunch of dogs and go swimming. It was very nice out there.
Yeah, very good. Tanya.
Good morning, everyone. Stayed local, but we tended to our community garden over at Lentz Park and spent some time at Essex Park and Mount Tabor Park, and bike rides with my kids, as well as really encouraging them to clean their rooms so we can be ready for online school at home. So trying to get those school ready.
Great. Sounds totally appropriate. Okay, Vicente.
Good morning, everyone. This weekend, I took my family to Hag Lake. I know someone mentioned that. It was a beautiful day at Hag Lake yesterday, so just got a chance to go out, get feet in the water, feet in the dirt a little bit. Got back into a gloomy, windy Portland. It was really surprising. So, but yeah, it was a great weekend, though. Beautiful weekend.
Thank you. And Tate.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. We went to Ochoco National Forest on a camping trip a couple weeks ago. So we stayed in Portland this weekend and just tried to do normal visits to parks and a bike ride. Thank you.
Very nice. And Margaret.
Good morning. I explored small towns and natural areas from Amboy, Washington down to Amity, Oregon. So just trying to get out of my neighborhood and local area. It was good.
Great. And Maximo.
Hello. Yeah, I was able to get out to the coast, out at Rockaway Beach this weekend, and then where it was really pleasant, wonderful weather, and then returned to some warm weather in Portland, and then suddenly became windy and very smoky. So I didn't know I would be happy with just the heat. So that was the weekend.
Great, thank you. I think that wraps up all of our regulars, and we're going to move on to checking in on, one reminder that Everett reminded me of. I have a 10 o'clock meeting, so I'm going to need to leave by 9:55. So Bonnie also has a 10 o'clock meeting, so we'll try to wrap up as close to 10 as we can.
Hey, Paul, it's Casey. I just want to tell you what's
Casey,
on the phone.
sorry, I didn't recognize
No, that's all right.
the phone number.
No, Yeah, sorry. I'm presently at the Oregon coast where there is no power. We're still getting wind. It's totally dark outside with the color of red, just so you guys all know. So that's why I'm on the phone. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Casey. All right. So our August meeting minutes, hopefully everyone's reviewed them. Do we have a motion to approve?
So move.
Casey, so moved.
Great. Take that as a second. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, we have approved our August minutes. Thank you all. And now we will move on to Adina's report.
Thank you, everyone. Good morning. I'm actually going to pass the mic to Vicente and Margaret to do my report. The concerns over protests in parks and over workers and workplace safety has arisen at the last couple of board meetings and some emails in between. So I asked them to take my time to give you all an update on where we are and steps that we've been taking.
Thank you, Adina. I'll start with a few items and then pass it over to Vicente. Some of the things that we've been doing this year to help support our staff, knowing that we had our recreation seasonal and full-time staff going out and serving the public with our lunch and play program. The equity team, equity and inclusion team and workforce development team, we partnered together and actually trained on our staff on what to do or if they were to encounter bigotry or hate in our parks. The training that we put in place this summer actually was something that we've had in place for a couple years, really designed guidelines to prevent, respond, and report if anything occurs. And Vicente can talk more about reporting what happens when employees do report incidents. And then also both parks and citywide, from a human resources and workforce development perspective, we're evaluating and updating our policies. So currently, for instance, we're updating one of our administrative policies that is about prohibiting harassment and discrimination in the work environment, and that has both an internal and an external element. So looking at what are our policies, what are our procedures, what are the guidelines for employees, making sure that they're updated and responsive to the current environment that our employees are working in. And then also, as you know, we have a very large seasonal force typically, and this summer, you know, we had a smaller seasonal force. It was about 200 employees. But as seasonal as they were encountering things just like our full-time employees, but they didn't have access to all of our benefits, particularly our employee assistance program, which helps providing them a resource if they have somebody or if they need somebody to talk to. And we've been working with the Bureau of Human Resources to actually extend those benefits to our seasonal employees, which is significant because it provides them with access to free counseling services and with trained professionals. So it kind of helps balance out what we can provide as an employer. And with that, I'll actually turn it over to Vicente.
Thank you, Margaret. And again, just trying to give you some really high points, some high level points. And if there's any follow-up, we can follow up offline. But our security and safety team has been collaborating with workforce development and also our equity and inclusion team to develop what some other agencies have. It's called a trauma support team. Actually something that we've been looking into for the past 12 months, but because of a turn for the less fortunate in experiences of trauma for our staff, we've expedited this process for us to come together as different divisions and formulate a trauma support team so that when employees in our agency experience trauma, we have some sort of level of support outside of our standard EAP, workforce development, and supervisor and manager support options that we typically have in place. So that's still currently under development. We're working with Taisha McCool Riley with the Office of Civic Life. She's their mental health first aid specialist. So we look to activate this hopefully at the end of this year, hopefully towards the start of next year. But again, that's still currently under development. Another thing I wanted to highlight is our PPNR security incident program, our reporting process. So this is a process that we've developed over the past couple of years. So whenever an incident happens in parks, notification that all employees send a notification. It goes out to safety manager, security manager, park manager, a deputy director, a contingency of staff that can respond from a safety and security standpoint. So we've been looking to that tool to enhance it, to perhaps include information on how more specifically people are being impacted in terms of the trauma they're dealing with. If it's bigotry and hate trauma, we are looking to maybe put a trigger in there to help us push that information to the E&I team more quickly for a response from an equity support standpoint, push it to the workforce development team for a more enhanced response with employee assistance program and other counseling options. The third and more importantly thing I wanted to highlight for you is obviously the demonstration activity that's been happening in and around downtown. I think everyone's pretty aware. We gave a couple updates, but in terms of what we're doing now, we're meeting with Portland Police on a daily basis to kind of talk about how this is impacting our parks and our employees. So we're meeting with them daily through the weekend. This meeting is to kind of talk about what properties activities taking place at, and what we're coming to find out outside of peaceful protests that are happening and quite frankly are invited to our spaces to take advantage of peacefully. There are spaces that are being taken advantage of where people are gathering and they're doing things that are not so pleasant. They're vandalizing, they're causing disturbances throughout our city. So we're working with police to kind of identify those places and put whatever we can in place to try to prevent some of that activity. There's limited things that we can do, again, from a park standpoint, but again, collaborating with police to know where activities happen, to know where resources are, and most importantly, to keep staff safe is what our collaboration is for. And then some of these parks are Kenton Park in the northeast area, Ventura Park in East Portland, Laurel Horse Park has been a constant area of gathering, Alberta Park in North Portland, and of course Chapman Lonsdale in downtown. So it's been across our system. Those are just a small handful of the parks that have been impacted. Last but not least, all of this has been these updates, these trauma support team, the improvement to our communication system with our incident reporting, all goes into our Red Book, our emergency action Red Book. It's an emergency action plan for all of our employees. It's a quick reference guide for our field staff. It's in all of our facilities. This book had to be updated. There's some incidents, some things that we've seen in 2020. We were already on the cusp of updating, but fights, violence, and threats, we've had to make updates to that section of the Red Book on what staff should do, what the protocol is, how to report that. We work in an industry where people will get that trauma, but not necessarily report it. And we have to get out of that culture and shift that paradigm. That is a small percentage, but it does happen in some cases. Civil disturbances and protests. Obviously, this is an area, we've seen it in Portland, but we haven't seen it for 100 consecutive days in multiple properties. So you have to make updates to that section. And this is currently underway. This is something that we're not thinking about doing. We're doing it right now. And then the last but not least, the exposure to blood, bodily fluids, needle sticks. Needles have been a thing in our parks that have been increased. Staff's exposure to needles, how to report it, how to safely mitigate that situation is something that we're looking to update in our Red Book. And sorry, I went over time, Adina, but I'm going to give it back to you.
Thank you very much, Vicente and Margaret. Does anyone have any questions?
I do. Thank you for these reports. They were very informative. And so the first question I have is just trying to get a sense of the scale of this. I can imagine it's many dozens of incidents of violence and vandalism in parks. So that I'm curious about just the scale, the order of magnitude of the events that you've dealt with over the last 100 plus days.
So every incident in the park doesn't rise to the level of incident. Some incidents, when in terms of vandalism and routine operations, it's handled at the division level, at the supervisor, the land stewardship level. Tanya maybe can speak to that more in detail. But when it comes to impact to staff, a catastrophic vandalism that will cost significant dollars to improve, and or injury to staff, whether it be verbal assaults or physical assaults, those are the incidents that rise to the level. So pre-COVID in the summer, I mean, it's pretty frequent. We get about, a minimum of 10 to 15 incidents that we're at least responding to. Since COVID, because activity has shrunk in some cases in what we do, it's less reports. However, the reports are more catastrophic. It's like 2 reports, but it's like staff got touched, staff got thrown at and was verbally assaulted. So it's like, okay, well, that's intense. It's not, somebody spray painted on a park bench. So again, it's been less, it's been a little bit more intense. I think everybody's experienced that, but we've had to, again, retool our options for support so that we're prepared to deal with the change that we're seeing.
Thanks, Vicente. You said that, in a pre-COVID summer, it'd be about 10 or 15. Is that per summer or per month? Or I'm just trying to get a sense of the frequency.
I mean, that's a real rough estimate. That's per week.
Okay.
Week. And then in a hot summer, August night, that's a day,
Yeah.
Incidents happen. When we have more permitted events in parks, incidents happen. When we have people out earlier in parks, when parks are open and all of our amenities are fully active, more incidents happen. Pools, incidents happen. So there's just a lot more that, we don't have these exposures to incidents, but about 10 to 15 a day during a regular summer. But let's get with Carrie Anderson and our analytics team to get an accurate account if you want to dig into that a little deeper.
No, that just puts it into frame for me. So, that's substantial. So that's appreciated to understand that. And the other piece is just verbal assaults and sort of racial and other bias expressions. It's clearly we're seeing more of that generally. So I'm curious about how that's showing up in our parks.
Am I taking this one? So yeah, verbal assaults, quite frankly, and anyone jump in, Tanya probably can jump in, but our staff really takes verbal assaults almost on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
Some when we're in parks and we want to clean or we want to do routine activities, people are not happy that we're doing that. When rangers are coming to parks, sometimes people don't know why we're there, so they think we are there. So verbal assaults happen, almost daily. City workers, it happens sometimes, but when you talk about the intensity and the aggressiveness of these assaults and the personal attacks associated with these assaults, the bigotry associated with the assaults, those have kind of been more prevalent in the last 12 to 24 months.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll just, Vicente, thank you. And for land stewardship, obviously with our park techs, horticulturists, and seasonal maintenance workers, they are out in the parks doing daily cleaning. And so they're interacting with the public every day. And we do have incidents every day. We are working with our employees to ensure that we're reporting. I think a lot of these incidences go unreported. It's kind of unfortunately seen as part of the work. But in this heightened environment, we're definitely coaching our employees and encouraging them, if they get into a situation where they feel uncomfortable, to get in their trucks as soon as possible, and also to ensure that we're reporting these incidences so we can take a security approach to it.
I have a question, if I may, please. And I think, thank you so much for all the efforts of keeping the staff safe. I think that's really important. And unfortunately, I do feel like there is sort of a pressure to not report, because historically, societally, people have had to endure things like this. And of course, that is not right. So I appreciate the efforts that the Bureau is taking to encourage staff to report and ensure that those issues are addressed. I'm wondering, and I don't know who the right person is to answer this, but maybe Vincente, I'm not sure. I'm wondering the degree to which incidents that occur in and around our parks, are they being reported by us as a Bureau differently when clearly there are employees, public employees that are escalating? I just want to ensure that, I mean, I think it's great that, again, our priority is to keep our employees safe, but in terms of police not de-escalating and escalating things, and as much as this is happening in and around our parks, I'm concerned about that, and I'm wondering if we as a Bureau are doing what we can to ensure that those kinds of issues are being called out. Because obviously what the Parks Bureau can do about them is pretty limited. I guess I just want to ask that question.
I don't know if I understood your question completely, but I will say that we handle incidents that are occurring in our parks to the best of our ability within our authority internally. But the security and safety team has an incredibly good relationship with the Portland Police Bureau. So regardless of how we feel about how they're dealing with other situations in the city, they're incredibly responsive to us and work with us. And we also work really closely with the city attorney's office when incidents have been identified and the perpetrator is known or can be investigated. So I hope that answers, but I see that Vicente unmuted himself to speak as well.
No, I think you covered it well, Adina.
Bonnie, I'm just going to add, I think there's a reason we have a ranger program, and it's because we educate first, we inform people of the rules, we give them an option to voluntarily comply, and when they don't, you know, we have a series of steps we can take, from ejecting the person from the park or excluding them for a period of time, or if it's a bias or verbal assault or physical assault, we can have a longer exclusion from multiple properties. And then lastly, police is called. And so the ranger program, I think, is a great example of probably what we need more of in the city rather than less of, in my personal opinion.
Thank you for that, Todd. Really quick. Oh, sorry, Bonnie. Just really quick, just on that point Todd was making. So the reason why we went to council in 2019 to get our Title 20 exclusion expanded was so it was a part of this impacts to employees that we were seeing back then. So employees and our patrons were being exposed to things that we had limited enforcement action we can take. Now that action is expanded to the number of days that we can expand people to be excluded from our properties, and multiple properties. So if it could be all of our swimming pools, it could be all of our golf courses, it could be all of the parks on the west side. It could be system-wide. That usually comes from a judgment from the court, and it's a catastrophic crime that would take that. But yeah, that's a tool that we have now in place that we did not have a year ago to help protect our staff and patrons. Sorry. Thanks, Todd.
No, thank you. And I appreciate the context of, as you know, I am a huge advocate of the Rangers. I think that they do amazing things and help to de-escalate the situation. I agree, it's the kind of program we need more of citywide. What I'm asking though is when the police are already involved specifically, and when they are escalating, do we as a bureau have a way to report that and say that is not acceptable? It is not acceptable to tear gas entire neighborhoods because a handful of instigators have crossed whatever the line is. That specifically is what I'm asking.
So Bonnie, there is a system to report conduct unbecoming for police officers, and I believe it's the same system that is available to the community, and it gets investigated, through the internal affairs system. So yeah, and I can't imagine that as a bureau we would submit a complaint to something that broad. However, if something happens specifically in a park, my hope is that our first conversation is with PPB on one of our daily calls, and that's the reason why we have them. We've been lucky that our parks have been, for the most part, been spaces where folks are gathering before and after activities, and it is unfortunate that that activity and the impacts to the community is happening throughout the neighborhoods. So it's a fine line, I guess is the best way to put it. But there is the same system is in place for the general community as is for the Bureau to report unsavory activity and potentially illegal activity.
In terms of that accountability and the protection and safety of our staff, we have activated that mechanism for a situation this summer that encountered our staff in an interaction with police. It was involving a access situation. So to be more specific, yeah, we hold them accountable when it comes to the impacts to our staff and their treatment and their right to be protected and served like every other citizen. So to bring it back to home and how it is directly related to us and that accountability, that's a way we used it this summer, and we use it when it's appropriate.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I'd like to move on unless there are any really pressing questions, just to keep on track with our agenda. Okay, great. So we're going to move on to the working group reports, and we're going to start with Tamara with the Community Development Group.
Thanks, Paul. I don't have a whole lot of updates here. I'm still connecting with Pune and Alejandra, and we're gonna do a little bit more brainstorming on what we'd want our bigger discussion to be like. So we're gonna meet sometime next week. And I also just wanted to add a thank you to Vicente and Margaret and Adina for the update. And this is a thought, and it doesn't have to be followed up about, but in my little science sphere, folks have been talking about looking at the effects of tear gas on different plant life, so like mosses or trees and wildlife, and I thought that was an interesting point to make in regards to parks. Not sure if anything like that is being looked at, but just could be something to just expand a little bit into. But yep, but that's my 2 updates. Thanks.
Thank you, Tamara. And next up is Mike.
Thanks, Paul. So just a quick update on where the current year budget is. Parks recommendations for the fall bump are going to be submitted to council, I believe, tomorrow. And then the ultimate hearings and votes are going to occur later in October. So one thing to keep in mind is that the budget ideally is probably going to be approved before the results of the levy vote are known in early November. As part of the planning for this year's fall bump, the division managers have all submitted their budget adjustments, both for ongoing expenses and also the necessary one-time reductions that we've talked a little bit about in the past. And those recommendations were presented both to the Budget Advisory Committee and also to our Financial Sustainability Working Group at our last meeting. I'm just going to point out a couple things that I think might be of interest to people is One is there were no proposed changes to the equity and inclusion budgets. So that's the one department that was not impacted by the necessary reductions. The two departments that were really affected the most probably are urban forestry, which is projected to have their tree permit revenue fall by about 8%, about $600,000, I'm sorry, by about $600,000, which is about 8% of their annual budget. So that's a pretty big hit they're taking. That's mostly being made up through two places. One is vacancy savings, and the other is they're going to be accessing, there's an urban forestry trust fund that's funded primarily by tree code violations. They're going to be accessing some of the funds from that to make up for some of the shortfall. And then the other department that we know has been hit really hard is recreation services, because such a significant portion of their funding comes from program fees. So they're in a position where they're kind of reimagining the whole division from the ground up, and they've looked at really kind of what they want to do from an operational and budgetary standpoint going forward, and looked at 3 different models of, when they should open community centers. And ultimately what the decision they've come to for now is they're going to continue to operate under the existing health guidelines. So the community centers will stay closed indefinitely, I think, until the time feels right. And I think that will help them meet all of their budget needs and retain existing staff while meeting a lot of their equity goals and remaining responsive to what's obviously a rapidly changing environment. The Budget Advisory Committee did put together a letter recommending all the changes that were brought to us. Bonnie drafted that. I think it's gone out. I haven't actually seen it yet, but well, we did recommend approving those changes. As far as next year's fiscal budget, nothing's really happened on that. I think the planning will really start happening in earnest after the fall bump. And then lastly, I think I talked in the last meeting a little bit about the community engagement plan and how it might drive some funding decisions going forward. The community engagement team is going to be conducting listening sessions through the end of October. And it's going to be done in partnership with about 30 community stakeholder partners, largely from historically underrepresented communities. And so those reports are going to inform a lot of the decisions I think that get made going forward. And the results of the listening sessions are going to be presented back to us as a full board in December. So I think that's what I have, Paul.
Thanks, Mike. And we'll next swing over to Patty.
Thank you. We met last Tuesday, had a presentation on a very exciting new park at Park Lane, which is a presentation from Britta. It's about a 20-acre park, former gravel extraction, and before that an airstrip, with some very special views of Mount Hood. There's a great deal of thought going into the activities that will be held in the park and the sort of facilities they need to be able to use the space flexibly and effectively. It's in sort of public consultation, began in 2016, and so it's in the design phase now with construction in 2021-22. Reviewing all of the other topics that were presented last month, really there's not been any change very much at all. There was a challenge to parking proposed at an entrance to Forest Park out on the St. Helens Road. that objection has been dismissed, so there will be space there now for for groups, particularly parking, to get access to Forest Park. The only other news is questions asked about the possible new entry and lodge at Montgomery Park. A master plan has been prepared for the Montgomery Park land, it's about 17.5 acres, but there is really no commitment to build the lodge or the bridge into the park. So it's a very welcome idea, but it's probably 10, 15 years out. So we're not holding our breaths for that. And that's, I think, all we have to report.
Betty?
Yes.
Hi, this is Lauren. I just want to add that as far as the Forest Park entry goes, you're correct. The land use appeal was denied, but they could still appeal to LUBA, to the Land Use Board of Appeals. That's still possible. we don't know.
Thank you, Lauren. Yes, you're absolutely right. Over to you,
All right.
Paul.
All right. Thank you, Patty and Lauren. Bonnie, what can you update us on the process improvement?
Yes, hi everybody. So we did meet for our second meeting and we talked a lot about the different goals the two different bureaus have, again, being Portland Parks and then Bureau of Environmental Services. The fact that the goals are a little bit different. You know, BES has focused on this Gray to Green program, but ultimately it came down to, you know, bringing those goals together and having a shared vision for the tree program. We talked a little bit about metrics and intermediate metrics in particular about what would indicate success for this program, because we realized pretty quickly that it can't be just about number of trees, because there's the issue of difference in canopy, east side and west side. Luckily or unluckily, there's a number of very data-driven people who are on the committee. So, you know, we talked about zeroing in on narrower geographies and even looking at some parcel-specific data, which is available. So that was kind of a really interesting discussion. It was also interesting to me personally. There's a nursery woman, I can't remember her name, maybe, anyway, who was in my small group. So her business is raising trees for sale in the world, whoever wants to buy trees. And she indicated that columnar trees are selling really well as opposed to canopy shade trees. And she just said that that was something that the industry was experiencing, which I thought was very, very interesting. So my understanding was the third meeting, which was supposed to also occur in August, they decided to push that out, and they had a meeting with the consultants and the staff. And then we're scheduling our third meeting to happen sometime, I believe later this month, but it hasn't been scheduled yet to my knowledge. So that's all I had. Thank you. Any questions? Or anything that, if Jen is on the call, I don't know if she is, maybe she wants to add.
Jen was unable to join us because she's dealing with tree emergencies this morning.
Not surprising.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Bonnie. Thanks, everyone.
Or maybe
for
Todd, if Todd had anything he wanted to add. I know Todd was there.
You did a great job. We'll meet in September and we'll have an update next month.
Thank you. All right, Randy, you're up. You're still muted, Randy.
Oh, there we go. Hi, everyone. We're very busy with a certain ballot measure, working very hard on that. But that's not the only thing we're doing. On September 26th, the foundation is going to hold its first Friends and Allies Summit, and we have a really exciting day lined up for all the various volunteer and nonprofit groups devoted to parks. We're going to do a special morning workshop with Dr. Alicia Moreland Kapuya. She's one of the nation's leading voices, and she also happens to be a Portland native and formerly of OHSU, now just recently went to Harvard University's medical school. Anyway, she's a specialist in understanding how individual and societal trauma can help deconstruct racism and racist structures. We feel very fortunate to have her. She's kind of becoming a bit of a rock star in her world. But she loves parks and loves Portland, and so is going to work with us on it. Adina and I will be doing a sort of opening session. First we have, I don't know if those of you who came to our bridge opening, Jordan Hales, who was the MC there, is going to be sort of our MC facilitator for the day. She's wonderful. Apart from being a professional facilitator, she's also a comedian. So we should have some light moments, and we're going to have some music interludes during the course of the day. But the serious stuff will be some workshops on building and expanding a membership base, communication strategies during a COVID era world, connecting with local funders. We'll have several local funders available to talk. We're going to do a workshop on kind of taking the next steps and overcoming barriers for those groups that have had some success but are looking to be more ambitious. And then the other thing we're really excited about, some of you may remember some years ago an event that the foundation did called Parque Diem that was kind of too successful. It got hundreds, over 1,000 volunteers, I think, one year, and kind of overwhelmed parks. They didn't really have the personnel to sort of deal with everybody turning out to volunteer in parks. And so what we decided to do was to do a very, very selective, carefully defined version of that, in which there will be work days in 5 to 6 parks across the city, socially distanced and working in close collaboration with PPR. So we're really excited about that. You can go on our website and sign up for any of this stuff. It's all free. And so there's that. Also, let's see, we have, for those of you who know of small parks organizations trying to do work, our small grants deadline is coming up on September 30th. You can also find out more information about that on our website. September 28th, we'll have our third and final candidates forum, this one with Chloe Udaley and Migas Maps. You never know who's going to get parks, so we're going to quiz them on their attitudes towards parks. I think it should be actually quite interesting. There's some differences of opinion there. And lastly, on October 5th, we're going to relaunch our sort of Green Dreams, more of our talk show series with Vivek Shandas, who is an incredible researcher at PSU and also is chair of the Urban Forestry Commission. My working title is F Politics, Let's Talk About Trees. It probably won't be the final title, but anyway, Vivek and I are having a great time. I'm learning all about his background in India before he came here and the expanse of his work. And I'm trying to talk him into giving us a sneak preview of some pretty interesting research that he'll be releasing probably in early 2021. So tune in for that. If you're not on our mailing list, make sure to just go on the website and sign up, and look forward to seeing you at some of these events. Oh, incidentally, the Friends and Allies thing is all virtual. So yeah. Any questions?
Thanks, Randy. That was great. Hey, just before we transition over to the Vision 2020 report from Tate and Brett, what Randy was just mentioning, and then also touching on what Vicente and Margaret were sharing, I wanted to see who has been able to take advantage of any of the racial equity trainings that have been offered, or if anyone's looking forward to the one that's coming up on the 25th. Bonnie and I took that a couple of years ago and found it really good, kind of shockingly revealing in terms of the deep-seated racism that is here in Oregon in terms of the history of the state. So I would encourage all board members who have not taken that training to really look into it. It's well done, it's eye-opening, and it's very relevant to what we're doing right now. Okay, with that, let's move along to the update on the Vision 2020 plan from Tate White and Brett Horner.
Paul, before we begin, this is Adina, I'm just going to do a little preamble, if you don't mind, a little intro.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. So as you all recall, last month, Kenya and Nicola presented progress updates for the 5-year racial equity and strategic plans, respectively. Today, Tate White will present a high-level progress report for Vision 2020. But before she does that, I want to add some context. As you know, over the last year, we've had to focus on our most pressing priority, the financial stability of the Bureau. Many of our Bureau planning efforts have been integral to informing the Sustainable Future Initiative. As these monumental plans sunset, the natural instinct is to say, what's next? A few of us have begun to map out a framework that provides a green print, if you will, to help guide the next steps. The framework is only half-baked and still requires additional internal vetting, but I hope to share a draft in the coming months. One component of the framework includes idea gathering, which we have accomplished in many ways in the past. Given the Bureau's current reality and uncertain future, it's imperative that we continue the community engagement we began pre-levy referral, regardless of the outcomes of the November election. Mike Elliott touched on it briefly in his report, but I just want to reiterate that our community engagement team is currently planning listening sessions with community members between now and October 30th. We will provide an equity-centered engagement process that will help inform the parks budget process and strategic changes to recreation programming and other services moving forward. The process will communicate to the community that significant changes lie ahead for the Bureau and that we will center their voices as we make needed improvements to safe and accessible park sites, facilities, and services. We plan to build upon and expand themes and knowledge from past community engagement processes that have included community meetings and surveys. We're designing questions to better understand what we think we already know and better respond with needed improvements in the Bureau. With these listening sessions in mind, the community engagement team has developed a list of 30+ community stakeholders centering the voices and priorities of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, refugee and immigrant communities, youth and youth of color, people living with disabilities, seniors, and other represented communities. Parks board members who have lived experience or represent one of the constituencies centered in these conversations will be invited to participate in one of the upcoming community listening sessions. And again, as Mike mentioned, the community engagement team will provide an update to the Parks Board on initial findings at hopefully the December Parks Board meeting. So I just wanted to center the next part of the conversation in all that's coming. And now for a little look back, Tate's going to provide a little progress update on Parks 2020. Thank you, Tate.
Great. Thank you, Adina. And thank you all for having me today. Can everyone see my screen, the presentation that I've shared? Great. So I'm here to talk to you about work the planning group has done to revisit the Parks 2020 vision and highlight some lessons learned. We've made this presentation as concise as possible, so I'd like to move through it quickly and hold questions and discussion for the end. But of course, if something happens with my audio or the presentation, please let me know. The first 6 slides talk about the what the Parks 2020 vision and the 2009 progress report are. The bulk of the presentation covers the so what, which are key findings from the analysis. And then we end with the now what, focusing on lessons learned. And Adina has already covered some of the next steps. So the Parks 2020 vision paints a picture of a parks and recreation system that contributes to the quality of life that Portlanders have come to expect and enjoy. It describes a future in which parks and recreation services keep up with population demand while serving new growth. The vision established key goals, objectives, and targets for the Bureau. But as we'll see, these targets were highly ambitious and sometimes unrealistic. The vision identifies emerging issues expected to continue into the future, and not surprisingly, we are still dealing with these challenges today. The document outlines different strategies to confront these challenges, which includes a recommendation to establish this Parks Board. Much of the 77-page document gets into a detailed inventory of assets and recommendations by geographic subarea. The 5 overarching goals set by the vision are shown on this slide, and objectives and recommendations are loosely tied back to these in the vision. Don't worry, we'll come back to these, but I'm going to move on for now. In 2009, the Parks Board took a step back and an objective look at how the 2020 vision was working. They found significant progress on all 5 goals, despite the vision lacking an organizational framework that really lent itself, or even today lends itself well to assessment. However, with the 2009 progress report, the Parks Board made efforts to improve upon this. So they established an improved method of assessment. Objectives were clearly defined and tied to each goal. And then they clarified the 19 measures that were found in the document and then added 12 more that they found useful. The measures are what function as trackable performance metrics. And in addition to the 31 that are represented here on this slide, there were 5 objectives that had no established measures. So we've reported out on them as best we can for a total of 36 units. So where are we in 2020? Many of the metrics have been tracked and reported on over the years. But shifts in data collection, Bureau priorities, and investment in data analysis have impacted the Bureau's ability to report out on every single measure regularly. We'd like to move forward in summarizing the assessment we have been able to do, including in a document itself, and focus on lessons learned to inform discussion on the scope of future guidance for parks and recreation in Portland. We found that we made progress on almost half of the measures, equaling 47% as shown in the green pieces of the pie chart here. For 19% of the metrics, we held steady despite significant population growth of over 30%. That's shown in yellow. For 6% in the red, we fell short on our targets. And then in the gray, we found that 28% of the measures had data constraints that were too significant to fairly report out on. Examples of these constraints included baseline data that was initially very flawed, or the fact that there was one survey done then, but never repeated. We'll talk more about the constraints and where we fell short and why later in the presentation. Here's a graphic breakdown on how we did on measures broken out by goal. It shows that most of the measures were placed under the first goal, and generally we showed progress or holding steady despite this population growth we've mentioned. Many of the recreation measures have data constraints due to changes in how we collect and analyze data and new systems that we use to track registrations and also be able to collect and measure data. We've done well on the nature in the city and community-oriented measures, but have fallen short on the measures for Walking City of the West. These measures really had unrealistic targets related to trail development, and you'll see that's why we fell short on those. So we met or exceeded targets on several measures, including an 11% increase over the target for acres of habitat land protected. And many of these built upon existing natural areas, which was another measure. Several new plazas have been built, both in the downtown, like Director Park, but also in neighborhoods and in the east, like Gateway Discovery Park. And these support community gathering and events. We've seen an increase in volunteer hours, representative of 11 full-time staff positions. So for a little bit of context, last fiscal year, we had volunteer hours that represented a total of 215 full-time staff. So 10 measures showed progress. 70% of residents live within 3 miles of a full-service community center. That is up significantly from 13% in 2000, but it's not quite at the 100% that was the target. Over 10 new neighborhood parks have been built, and this doesn't cover the dozens of improvements we've made to existing developed parks or natural area additions. Collaboration with PBOT on neighborhood greenways and regional trails has better connected our assets in our system. Portland Parks and Recreation and Portland Public Schools have partnered on joint initiatives to maximize public benefit. So we've held steady for 7 measures, despite significant population growth of over 30%, as I mentioned. We currently have 18 acres of parkland per 1,000 people, which is down slightly from 19.3 acres per 1,000 in 2000, but considering the population growth, that's quite a slight decrease. We have been able to maintain 77% of residents living within half mile of a park or natural area despite this growth. And we've been able to maintain 84% of residents rating overall quality of parks as good or very good. So for the two measures where we fell short, as I mentioned, it is clear today that these targets were set unreasonably high, without regard to the very real barriers preventing steady progress on trail development. These barriers include unwilling property owners and just challenging physical site constraints. So the target was to double the 150 miles of major regional trails that we had in 2000. We haven't doubled that, but we've added 33 miles, which was significant and hard fought. We also have not completely 100% built out the 40-mile loop, but as we know, the 40-mile loop is much larger, much longer than 40 miles, and we still have made significant progress on filling gaps. So we want to highlight that there have been many Bureau successes that are not represented by these measures. The Bureau developed a racial equity plan that has helped support diversification of the demographic makeup of our Portland Parks and Recreation workforce. The Park Ranger program has seen impressive expansion and success and continues to. The 2014 Parks Replacement Bond passed successfully and provided $68 million to support major repairs and improvements. The SDC program was established and expanded, leading to $200 million in investments. And the Title 11 Urban Forestry Code was developed and went into effect, representative of the growth of the urban forestry program and its successes. It's important to note several caveats to this analysis. There has been inconsistency over time in the level of investment in resources and staff to support data systems. Methodologies have changed, often for the better, but it makes direct comparison over the years difficult. We're still in the middle of 2020, so we're not accounting for the full year of 2020 if you're thinking of the park's vision as ending at the end of this year. But we also want to note that we're in a global pandemic, and so this year would be a bit of an outlier anyways. And we're much more aware today of the limits to methods like surveys. And a lot of the park's 2020 vision measures relied on surveys. We know that there is a response bias towards individuals with higher education and income levels. And this challenges representative feedback on issues like affordability and accessibility. So we design data collection methods and do analysis differently now. Past surveys and performance measures, like those in the vision, look at citywide numbers and responses. Looking at these charts from the 2017 community survey, the first 20% number would be reported. It's a citywide number. However, if we cater our methodologies to be able to break the data down more, we can find how responses change by factors like geography and demographics to give a more accurate reflection of equity implications. So, as part of the analysis, we identified the following major lessons learned. Develop clear and measurable performance measures so they can be measured again without too many questions and compared more easily over the longer term. Find better balance between aspirational and realistic goals. If targets are too unrealistic, meeting them or learning from why we didn't meet them becomes that much more challenging. And a lot can change in 20 years. Apply inclusive engagement strategies. We are constantly learning new tools and best practices for engagement, so we just want to acknowledge that and continually make use of those. And similarly, for using improved tools and methods of analysis, which we've already touched upon. Looking at shortcomings of the vision now, we know we want to focus more on things like tree canopy and addressing the climate crisis. We also want to better acknowledge and address increasing bike ridership and other recreation trends. So in conclusion, I just want to note that a lot of these lessons learned are based off of the great work the Bureau is doing now to better understand equity implications of the distribution and quality of services across the city. This graphic is from the Sustainable Futures work and is referencing households that are not within a half mile walk to a play area, showing the disparity between East Portland and the rest of the city. And so with that, I'm going to stop talking, take a breath, and open it up to questions.
Thanks, Tate.
Thank you.
All right, who's got questions? Well, I'll start just by making a statement rather than a question. I really appreciated you breaking this down into what, so what, and now what, Tate. So that's really helpful. So I appreciate the effort to do that.
Kate, this is Casey. I wondered if that report can be emailed to us or we could otherwise access it.
No, thank you for that question. The report actually does not exist yet. So this is kind of showing our preliminary analysis looking into this as was requested. And so we're going to be working to put that report together with an outside consultant who worked on the Sustainable Futures work. And we'll be able to share it at that time.
Thanks, Tate.
Tate?
Anyone else?
Tate, this is Bonnie. Thank you for the presentation, and I very much appreciate that even though it was high level, you actually got into some of the initiatives and some of the specifics so that we had a better understanding of what was going on. So I very much appreciate that. Thank you. But to follow up on Casey's question, how about that 2019 annual performance report? I had not seen that before, and I was not familiar with some of the metrics that you identified there. I'd be very interested in seeing that.
Yes.
That would be great. That would be great. Yeah, coordinate that through Brooke. That would be terrific.
I'll work with Jason Smith and his team. I know they worked on that, and I'm not sure it's been completely vetted to be shared with the public, but of course, also the park board is another level. So I'll talk to him about that.
Okay, terrific.
Bonnie?
I'm wondering.
Oh, sorry, Bonnie. This is Lauren. We do have a table that talks about how we did achieving the Parks 2020 vision that lays out each goal, the target, and whether the goals met or not, that we can share.
Thank you, Lauren. That's helpful. I'm wondering if we can also drill down a little bit on some of the data constraints.
Mm-hmm.
What concerned me in particular was the little bar chart that you showed. My eye zeroed right in on recreation for all. I noticed that there were 9 measures that you identified there, Tate. 3 of them were indicated some progress, and then 6 were indicated as had data constraints. And you know, that's one of the reasons that I tend to focus on what are the right metrics and what are the right intermediate goals. I wonder if we could drill down on those a little bit, because I have to say that's pretty concerning when, you know, recreation for all is one of our big goals, and to realize that 6 of the 9 issues were not even able to quantify our success on because of lack of data is a concern to me. So I don't know if you, and I recognize you might not have the information to answer that question. I guess I zeroed in on that, and that was a concern to me.
Totally. No, I think that makes a lot of sense that you did that. You know, one thing I noticed that was interesting is a lot of the measures that I think we would consider under Recreation for All goal today were actually under the Ensure a Park Legacy for the Future, that first goal, which I found a little confusing. And I think it reflects kind of how we've progressed in our understanding of equity itself. But then also, I will say we use ActiveNet now. That's the system we use for recreation. And it's just so different than the old system that we used. And our data group is just very concerned about comparing data that has just been collected so differently. So that's where a lot of that comes from. But thank you for mentioning it, and it's something we'll continue to look into, of course.
Yeah, no, and I definitely appreciate the challenge of being able to do time series analysis on different data sources. I mean, I recognize that that is a challenge when you're trying to do any kind of comparison. Like I said, I mean, I think it might make sense at this point to sort of, with the current lens that we have, look back at those goals and measures and then just zero in on those a little bit more. So thank you. I just appreciate you looking into that. Thanks.
Kate, this is Adina. Thank you so much for the presentation. You can unshare your screen now.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
I was told to leave that last slide up longer so people could process it.
I appreciate it. Thank you also, everyone, for your thoughtful feedback. We will follow up on the questions and the requests. And I believe we also have some follow-up from the Racial Equity Plan and Strategic Plan presentations from last month. So thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Tate while we have her? All right. Well, thanks a lot. That was very helpful. So we're going to move on to our invited guest today. It's Cassie Davis from HDR, and she's going to be presenting on the earthquake-ready Burnside Bridge.
Hi, good morning. I'm Heather Catron with HDR.
Sorry.
And that's my apologies. I think we had Cassie's name on there.
Yeah.
I am going to see if I can figure out how to share my screen. So if you'll bear with me for a moment. Can everyone see my screen? Okay, I'll put it in presentation mode. I'm trying to anyways. Okay, so Tate, did you want to provide some introductions? I think we had maybe you introducing us.
Yes, I believe Teresa Boyle was going to try to make it. Teresa Boyle is with PBOT, Portland Bureau of Transportation, but I think she might be struggling getting in. But we just kind of wanted to touch base to kind of talk about, the Portland Bureau of Transportation is really leading a city group of technical advisors to help connect the county and the project team to city staff. And I've been serving as the Portland Parks and Recreation staff contact for PBOT, the county, and the project team. But I'm communicating with representatives from across different work groups with the Bureau. And I just wanted to also mention that conversations about connections to the bridge and mitigation for impacts to parks and recreation are ongoing. But their presentation really covers everything else, and I've let them know about your what, so what, and now what desires, and I'll go ahead and hand it over to the project team.
Thank you, Tate. I'm not sure if Teresa has joined yet or not. So I guess I'll go ahead and start. So good morning, and thank you for having us here with you today. I am Heather Catron with HDR. I am the consultant project manager for this project. I want to take just one moment to introduce my other project team members that are here today. So along with Tate and Teresa, we have Megan Neal, who is the county's project manager for this project. And presenting with me today, we have Steve Drahota, who is the technical lead for the project with HDR, and Jeff Heilman, who is our environmental lead with Parametrics. So I'd like to take a moment to talk about the what of our project. Our project is really focused on seismic resiliency and emergency response. It's really about having one of our downtown bridges immediately available for use following a major earthquake, and then being able to support regional recovery and rebuilding. We're also focused on the long-term use of the bridge as it is being designed to a 100-year design life. We are currently in the environmental review phase of our project. I believe we were last here in front of you in August of 2019 to talk about the 4 alternatives that are currently being studied in our federal environmental document. And today we want to share with you the recommended preferred alternative from our community task force. Some other important milestones to mention is that in January of 2021, we're going to be publishing our draft EIS. We're looking at wrapping up our environmental review phase in October of 2021, and we are beginning our type selection phase work now. That may be a little different than what we're used to seeing in some of projects of this type. One of the reasons why we're doing that is due to federal requirements that we have our federal permits 90 days after our environmental document is completed. For us to be able to have those federal permits, we need to start and have our type selection process underway so that we can have the details that we need for those federal permits. And then of course, we'll be heading into design and then construction. So I just want to take a moment to touch on that preferred alternative recommendation. So our community task force has recommended one of our replacement alternatives as the preferred alternative. As you might remember, there are 4 alternatives currently being studied. 3 of them are replacement alternatives, and 1 of them is a retrofit alternative. This replacement alternative that is being recommended as the preferred alternative from the community task force is the long span replacement. This long span replacement is in the current alignment of the bridge. It is a movable bridge, so we're looking at if it's a lift or a bascule bridge, and it has the same landings or the same tie-ins to the street network on the west and east side as the current bridge does today. The reason why this is called the long span alternatives is because we are using longer spans for the bridge. What this does is allow for less structure underneath, and in a moment I'm going to talk about some of the benefits of that, but it does move structure to the top of the bridge, as you can see in the picture. This is just an example of what that structure might look like. We have a whole process that we're going to go through during type selection to get into more details about what that structure on top of the bridge might look like. And to just provide you some examples of what that could be, as we're entering into type selection, some of the range of options that will likely be discussed are representative here. The first row that you see are just showing some examples of what a tight arch bridge might look like. The second row is showing some examples of cable stays. So certainly, you know, our example in our city would be the Tillicum Bridge. That third row is showing through truss examples. So those are bridges like our Broadway or our Hawthorne Bridge. And then the last 2 rows are really just showing the different configurations that a bascule bridge, so the bridge that's like out there today, or a lift bridge could be configured in. And again, there's a whole range of these that we'll ultimately be talking and working through for the type selection process. And so going back to the what of our CTF recommended alternative, some of the reasons why they recommended this, some of the benefits, is that it is best for seismic resiliency. And as you'll recall, that really is the core purpose of our project. The reason for that is if you can see kind of the lighter shades highlighted on the map here, there's some on the west side and there's a large area on the east side. Those are highly liquefiable soils that perform very poorly during an earthquake, and the less structure that we have to have in those soils, the better. So the longer spans means that we have fewer columns in that highly riskier area. This also leads it to be the least cost alternative because mitigating for those highly liquefiable soils is very expensive. It helps to enhance and preserve community resources. The longer spans, for example, on the west side allow for fewer columns in the park. And it also improves safeties for bikes, pedestrian, ADA. This bridge is a wider bridge than what's out there today, and it is allowing for larger bike and pedestrian facilities. It also has the least impacts, well, it allows us to not have significant impacts to the skate park and has the least impacts to natural resources because we don't have to have so many piers in the water. Some of the impacts associated with this alternative is that it does remove the existing bridge today, which is on the National Register for Historic Resources. And then certainly the bridge that's being proposed, because it does have that structure above the bridge, consideration to impacts to view corridors that may have. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve Drahota to talk a little bit more about the features of the preferred alternative. And then Jeff Howman is going to talk a little bit more about the now what, so what we're looking at for things like mitigation. So Steve, I'm going to have you up next.
Okay. So some of the key elements or features of the bridge is what's happening in and around the parks on either side of the bridge. So we wanted to focus some graphics on what could be. And again, because of all the different variables that Heather was sort of showing, these are representative of different options or considerations. So in the upper left-hand corner is the replacement long span over Waterfront Park. Now this is with a cable stay structure. So if you look in the background, you can see the towers and the cables extending down. It actually shifts the location of the columns further to the east or more in the middle of that space within Waterfront Park versus a different option like the tied arch, which would move those supports or columns closer to Natal Parkway. So there's some options, but what compared to any of the other options, the bottom left or the bottom right, which are the replacement short span, meaning more conventional, kind of similar to what's out there, but built to modern standards, or the enhanced seismic retrofit on the bottom right, which is really taking every single one of those supports and almost putting think of it as a concrete jacket around every column and a much larger foundation system because of that seismic risk that Heather just showed in those prior slides. So there's a real difference in the way that you have your columns supported in Waterfront Park. On the upper right-hand corner, oh, I'm sorry, back.
Sorry. Sorry.
Up in the upper right-hand corner of the picture that will come back, right there. That's a view of the Burnside Skate Park. And Heather mentioned each of our replacement options spanning over the Burnside Skate Park. This comes with making quite a long steel span structure that goes all the way from 3rd to this interior support, which is located to the west of 2nd Avenue. But the ability to create these long spans means that there, for the permanent condition, is no impact to the Burnside Skate Park. So it's a major benefit with the replacement alternatives. Right, next slide now, Heather, please. So also on the east side is a focus on accessibility to the East Bank Esplanade. And the way that our current concept is showing, I want to say current concept because there's quite a bit of work to do between now and ideally the DEIS time, which should be released sometime in early 2021, to think through the different concepts of an ADA accessible ramp, not just the stairs that are out there today, but an ADA accessible ramp to lead from the skate park, I'm sorry, from the East Bank Esplanade up to the side of the bridge. And this concept would be there for any of the alternatives. So it's just a matter of what makes the most sense, what are the different concepts, how best to tie into this enhanced bicycle pedestrian bridge, because there's gonna be a lot more space for bicycles and pedestrians for this access to the East Bank Esplanade. So this is just one concept, and you can see in the bottom right picture, what does a long span really mean? What it means is the removal of all those columns all the way from the interior supports in the river to beyond the railroad. So all those columns that are on the eastern side of the Willamette River or in the middle of the freeway or in the middle of the railroad are all being removed so that we can avoid that very seismically vulnerable geotechnical area, and it just kind of opens up all that space below. Right, next slide, please. So one of the key questions is what should be built? The other key question is what should happen to traffic during construction? And so we did quite a bit of analysis and worked with the Citizens Task Force to ask the question of, well, should the adjacent bridges be used as a natural detour for all the different modes? Or should there be a temporary bridge? And in the bottom left picture, you can see a temporary bridge is no regular temporary bridge because you have to maintain ship navigation. You actually have to build a temporary movable bridge that lifts up and down for all the ships, including up to almost 150 foot navigational clearance. So the consequence of a temporary bridge is $90 million and adds 2 more years to construction because you have to work within an in-water work window in order to make sure you don't impact natural resources, which having more temporary supports in the river plus all the other work would get to that point. So when we asked this question to the CTF, they ultimately recommended that that the project capitalize on the adjacent bridges rather than spending that extra $90 million and taking those extra 2 years. And so that's why the full bridge closure is identified as the recommended way to handle traffic during construction. All right, next slide, please. So following these recommendations from the CTF, there has been a pretty sizable outreach to the community. There's been an online open house, and we're pretty pleased with the outcome. There's been over 24,000 visits to the site, over 6,000 survey participants, and of those, overwhelming support for the options that the Citizens Task Force made. So 88% support for the bridge option, meaning that long span option, and 84% support for this question of what to do with traffic, to divert traffic to those adjacent bridges. There are a number of themes that came out of that, because we did ask what kind of input should we be taking in while it's going forward. The themes were that and just like the bullets say, the long span recommendation makes the most sense. It's best for seismic resiliency and cost. People seem to really understand that differential, that difference between them. An excitement and a concern for aesthetics. So is this sort of a pros and cons exercise when you're replacing something with an open look with something goes longer with more of an above the deck feel? Some people had a concern for it. Some people were excited about the opportunity that could bring. And then obviously with that, a concern for impacts to, a historic resource. People understand and really appreciate the Burnside Bridge, having been built since the mid-20s. From a traffic option standpoint, the full bridge closure makes the most sense. You can tell that just based on the 84% support. In order to save the money and go faster, the classic rip the Band-Aid off, although the reality is construction, even for, quote, ripping the Band-Aid off, is about 4 years, maybe plus or minus. The reduced construction time and impacts to Burnside Skate Park were very significant to folks, and with the replacement bridges, that's the benefit that came. Although obviously there was a concern for, well, what about traffic? How do we minimize traffic impacts? And one of the findings that we presented is, even with a temporary bridge, because it only has one lane in each direction, there is going to be congestion. And so the additional travel time, depending on the route you take, only was in the range of 2 to 4 minutes. And so that fact, because there was going to be congestion anyway, it was one of those leading factors for why the recommendation fell out the way it did for utilizing the other bridges during construction. So with that, Heather, I think I hand it back to you, or hand it to Jeff here.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Yes, so Jeff, you want to take a minute to talk a little bit about some of the now what with the project and the preferred alternative?
Yes, definitely. Can you guys hear me okay? All right. So I'll do a pretty light touch on this because we want to make sure we leave plenty of time for questions and discussion. What this slide is listing here is just a sort of overview of the resources we looked at within parks and recreation facilities and types of impacts to functions in the facilities themselves. Obviously, the events that take place at Waterfront Park, as well as using the Esplanade, is a big deal because there would be temporary closures of the Esplanade. With the long span, the recommended preferred alternative, that's up to 18 months is what we've assumed for temporary closures of the Esplanade under the bridge. It is possible that it could be shorter than that, and that we might be able to open it during certain periods of those 18-month period, of that 18-month time frame. But we're trying to be conservative in our estimates for the EIS to make sure that we don't have to come back later and say the impacts are going to be greater than we had anticipated. Construction staging taking place, there's very little room here, and there's almost no access on the east side to the bridge itself to be able to do in-water construction because of the I-5, the ramps, and the railroad there. So construction access to temporary work bridges, which are out over the water themselves, has to come through Waterfront Park. That means temporary closure of parts of the Japanese American Historical Plaza, We also know that we're going to have, we have concerns about the historic districts and the historic landmarks, both local landmarks as well as National Register. We are looking closely at those impacts. At this point, we don't think we're impacting either of the historic districts on either side of the Burnside Bridge at the west end. As Heather mentioned, though, obviously there would be impacts with the preferred alternative, complete removal of the Burnside Bridge itself and some other potential historic resources as well. Rose Festival and Fleet Week, we've got some thoughts about, obviously there's going to be, with the Burnside Bridge closed, that has some impacts on parade and the parts of the waterfront being used for barges and access for construction equipment and materials. That could have some impacts on Fleet Week. We are exploring and want to see if there's a possibility that during Fleet Week, could it be that some construction could pause in certain areas and still allow Fleet Week to happen as normal. So those kinds of things are on the table. Saturday market would be displaced during the construction period. So obviously relocation of Saturday market temporarily, making sure they can still function somewhere is a big issue. We've been talking with park staff about that. Tree impacts, there are a number of trees and vegetation, landscaping that would be removed as part of the construction process, just to be able to have the equipment and the access and materials there. So that all has to be mitigated and replaced. And then I wanted to mention here too, social services. Well, that's not specifically a parks resource. There are, I mean, it's been described in our coordination meetings with the social service providers, Portland Rescue Mission, Central City Concern, et cetera, that they almost consider that west end around the bridgehead as like a campus for social services. And so we've been mindful about how the construction in particular might impact not only the ability of those agencies to provide services, but also impacts to their clientele or other people experiencing homelessness who use the parks themselves and the area around it. So one of the things that is an advantage about the long span alternative is the removal of those columns, having fewer columns underneath. We know from the principles of crime prevention through environmental design that natural surveillance can benefit public security, personal security. And so if we can remove some of those columns, decrease some of the shadow, dark areas there, that can actually help with security and safety underneath the bridge. Social service agencies did remind us that their clientele tend to experience crime in that area at a much higher rate than the average public. So that's something we've been mindful of as well. You can do the next slide. Just real quickly, these are some images from the Selwood Bridge. On the left, you can see Work Bridge. So we're talking about that would be, this Work Bridge would be accessed through Waterfront Park on the north side of the Burnside Bridge. There'd also be barges for, for cranes to be on, as well as barges to bring materials into the site. One of the things that we're looking at and we've assumed is going to be able to happen is that there would be some off-site staging of materials and assembly of things like rebar cages could happen elsewhere and brought in by barge so that we can minimize the amount of space that's needed for construction staging right around the bridge itself, since that's a waterfront park and very sensitive, as well as being a historic district. Next slide. Just another example of the kinds of activities that take place around bridge for initially the demolition of the old bridge itself and the construction of the new one. You can see on the left, this is the kind of good example of kind of things we would expect to see happening right next to the Burnside Bridge as part of construction. You can see why vegetation and trees would be removed for that to happen, and why there would be a need for significant replanting, revegetation afterwards. So that's another topic that we've been discussing with staff that will be part of mitigation. Very quickly, Waterfront Park or Waterfront Trail underneath the Burnside Bridge would have to be rerouted around the staging site. That's what this image on the right is about. It shows that the bicycles and pedestrians would be rerouted away from the waterfront out to NATO Parkway, assuming that bicycles would be able to use the NATO Parkway, better NATO itself, those lanes, and then pedestrians likely using the sidewalk to get around that construction staging area. There's also, we've been looking at we know from park staff that maintenance access is necessary, so there could be ability to flag maintenance trucks and facilities through the construction staging area as much as needed. So that's on the table as well. Next slide. And then the east side, as I mentioned, the Esplanade, we are currently assuming it could be closed for as long as 18 months where it crosses under the Burnside Bridge. But that means detouring any pedestrians or bicyclists or others who are using the Esplanade further back to the south and further back to the north. And then for crossing the river, they'd be using the Steel Bridge or the Morrison Bridge. Obviously, these routes are not going to be nearly as pleasant or as scenic as the Esplanade is itself. We think these are fair replacements for the sort of commuting transportation function of the Esplanade, but clearly don't fully replace or substitute for the recreational experience of the Esplanade. So that is also something we've been discussing, wanting to get a solution to. Next slide, please. Sorry. So the delay, one of the, as I think Steve mentioned some of this, I'll just reiterate that we know that trips from the north, we are assuming that with the Burnside Bridge being closed, if it is fully closed, no temporary bridge, those bicycle and pedestrian trips that still happen would instead cross on the Steel Bridge. Trips coming from the south or near the south of the Burnside Bridge, they would likely be going over the Morrison Bridge. And so we put together with city staff and others best assumptions of what routes those pedestrians and bicyclists might use. Obviously, they could use any route that they'd like, but for purposes of analysis and to try and figure out the effects on travel time, these are the routes that we came up with. And we assume bicyclists, it's anywhere from a 5 to 12 minute delay, about a 1 mile out of direction travel. And for pedestrians, it's as much as an 18-minute delay. So it's pretty significant out of direction travel for pedestrians. Next slide. You hit that once again. So these are just a few examples of, go back one. A few examples of some of the mitigation measures. Right now, because we're working towards issuing the draft EIS, and there'll be a fairly extended public and agency comment period on the draft EIS. We've had some input from park staff, but they are looking at these potential mitigation measures. We're gonna have more conversations about what might be feasible. Are we missing any reasonable alternatives? So we have a list of potential mitigation measures. These are a few examples. Obviously, tree replacement, relocation assistance for Saturday Market, some kind of a wall or screening that allows that part of Japanese American plaza, historical plaza that isn't being used to still be enjoyable and accessible. Maybe put some temporary interpretation in there for the interpretation that's out there now that would be temporarily removed and restored. We also know that we're going to be going through the non-park use permit process that has fees associated with it. It'll get into more in-depth discussion about exactly what types, how this temporary closures and rerouting of the trail might impact functions and revenue so that the parks would normally get from those functions. So that's all, that's all to come. One of the things we would like to get feedback on when we get through this is the rest of the slideshows. If there's any feedback or thoughts any members have about other mitigation measures, whether it's replacement or minimization or somehow replacing functions that are temporary lost. Any thoughts you have, we'd like to hear from you on that today as well. And then I'll pass it on.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm just going to touch briefly on next steps, and then we're opening it up to questions. So we are taking the results of our community outreach and the recommended preferred alternative from our community task force to our policy group next month. Our policy group is made up of regional elected officials and agency heads. Once the policy group approves that, it will then be published in the draft EIS. We're looking again at kicking off type selection, and we'll be looking for input throughout those processes. So today, along with any other thoughts, comments, inputs you have for us, we're curious about, as Jeff mentioned, ideas around mitigation. Are there things as we're moving into the type selection phase you think we should be thinking about or focusing on, or as we prepare for the environmental impact statement? So I think, Paul, maybe turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Heather and Steve and Jeff. That was a good presentation. Board members, who would like to ask a question first? I've got some, but I'm going to hold until others speak.
I have a question. I can't see everybody else. If I'm precluding anybody else, let me know. You know, I've sat through a few of these meetings, and maybe I dozed off or something, but I had never seen the contraption on the East Bank connecting the East Bank Esplanade to the bridge. And it sort of made me wonder, wouldn't an elevator be less visually intrusive and less expensive? And then my second question about it is, if we're having a connection to the East Bank Esplanade that's ADA accessible to the bridge, then why not the west side?
Thank you, Randy. And I'm going to ask Steve to answer those questions.
Sure. I think the first question is, would it be cheaper and less intrusive, if you will, to have an elevator? Absolutely, yes, on both accounts. The question really is the functionality, long-term maintenance, and septhead issues that go with an elevator. And so that's one of the concepts that is continually being discussed.
Sorry, what's septhead? I don't know that.
Oh, the safety principles.
Okay.
The comfort and safety of having an elevator, you know, in that space. So it is something that is on, you know, the table to continue discussing, although there is, you know, some recognized challenges that come with an elevator for all those reasons.
Yeah, agreed. A great example is the one down to South Waterfront.
Yeah. There you go. So more to come on that conversation on would it make more sense to put an elevator in? And then on the west side, there was some work through a couple different working groups on would it make sense to have any kind of a ramp structure, ADA accessible ramp to Waterfront Park. The grades are quite high, it's a 35-foot elevation, and so just building that ramp is, you know, you called it a contraption to the East Bank Esplanade. It's a similar type of contraption, slightly smaller, but similar type to Waterfront Park. And so through those conversations, where the group landed was providing ADA accessible ramp, much smaller ramp system right next to the existing light rail station. And so one is being proposed at that point. So it accompanies the stairs at that station. There's an ADA accessible ramp and the stairs there. So that was how we got to where we did.
Thanks.
Thanks for that question, Randy, and Steve for the response. And yes, I think it is quite a contraption. And I think because you're just very early in the design stage, there could be solutions with plazas and other features that could make that seem like less of a utilitarian structure and something that would blend in more with the surroundings. So I'm sure there's a design solution in there somewhere.
If I add one more point to that, the Human Access Project, we just recently met with them, and they've introduced a concept that's very different than the concept that we're showing. And so again, we're open to concepts, and we're looking forward to having this dialogue with the, well, there's an urban design and aesthetics working group that's being formed to help formulate some ideas that go with each of these ideas. So with that, I'll pause and let more questions occur.
Diving boards.
One comment, if I may, Paul, and that is, I think it's tremendously important that the design architect be introduced to the type selection study as early as possible. And this is a very good example. We talk about something like access to Waterfront Park and to the Esplanade, and the integration of that access with the overall bridge concept from the beginning is very important. So we don't end up with a beautiful bridge and odd things stuck on it. I think there's a temptation to say, well, this is basically an engineering problem, and we understand what those problems are. It is, but the way that people judge that engineering solution is very much influenced by what it looks like. So I can't emphasize too much the importance, I think, of getting the full spectrum of design injected into the process at the very beginning. Thank you.
Well said, Patty.
Paul, may I just on that touch briefly? Thank you, Patty, and absolutely agree. Part of the urban design and aesthetic working group that Steve just mentioned really is to get to that intent, where we are pulling together members from the urban design, art, and architecture community to help us through these conversations. And I would actually like to acknowledge and thank both Randy and Patty for agreeing to be part of that working group. And we're looking forward to getting that kicked off at the end of the month.
If I may sort of maybe put Patty's point in slightly more sharper terms. I think what we've seen over the course of time in Portland, and certainly in my observations, is an increasing reliance on the notion of the community or a steering committee somehow being responsible for design. The kind of complexity of this project and the impacts on public spaces that it will have necessitates a design vision. And that does not come from a committee. That comes from an individual or a team, from a firm who has handled, these kinds of issues, complex issues in aesthetically and humanly integrated form. It does not come from a committee. That doesn't check the box that Patty was putting on the agenda here. So just wanted to put a little sharper point on that. Thanks.
Thanks, Randy. All right. Well, thank you very much. That was very helpful. We'll look forward to hearing from you again in 2021. And we may have questions for you in the meantime. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. So I've got to leave in 2 minutes. So I want to start the conversation about the agenda for the next board meeting. If we don't get ideas today, you can feel free to contact me, Bonnie, or Brooke in the next week. We meet, actually I'll have to reschedule because I have a conflict next week. We typically meet the week after to start laying out the agenda for our upcoming meeting. So any thoughts from the board today in terms of what we'd like to cover in our next board meeting?
Just one little thing, Paul. I'm wondering if we could revisit the day and time that we do board meetings, because I don't think we've done that since we've gotten 6 new members.
Okay, good. Maybe what we'll do is do a poll between now and then for potential alternatives, and then we can have a conversation at the next meeting. That's a good topic. Anything else? Well, all right. Quiet group this morning, a day after a holiday. So thanks, everyone. It was a good meeting, and look forward to your input for the agenda for next time. And we'll see you all in a month. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.